me that one of the themes about Nashville that we all take pride in is our friendliness and how welcoming we are. And I stopped and thought about how one of the reasons we are so friendly and the reasons we are so welcoming is our faith. And that faith involves Christians and Jews and Muslims, and even involves those who have no faith as we understand it. But Nashville has a lot of religious institutions and a lot of churches. And that is an important part of who we are, and I think you feel that when you see how people just here care about each other.
It's a daunting challenge, to be sure. But it seems to me that our best response to that challenge is to regroup and focus on the work that we can do together. Focus on the connections that we can build between and among religious communities. To be sure, I don't see interreligious dialogue as a panacea. There's no magic elixir, and if there is one, no one's pointed me in its direction yet. But there is real power, as I will discuss in a moment, real power in the combined efforts of religious communities, and there is so much more which unites us than divides us. I was thinking about that as the mayor spoke, and he talked about Nashville's reputation as a welcoming city. Tonight's program is under the title, The Children of Abraham. I think of the story of Abraham resting comfortably in his tent as he sees passers-by on the road outside, and he hurries to give them hospitality. The ancestor whom we all share is one whose great legacy is one of hospitality and one of welcoming. Challenge that we often fail to meet. I think that challenge is more difficult now than ever. One reason it's more challenging is because we've become such a much more diverse nation religiously. Think about this. Today, the United States has the greatest number of religions of any country in the world. It is not just that so many religions have found a toehold in America, but that they are starting to take root. There are mosques and Buddhist temples not only in major urban areas, but in small towns across the country. In his wonderful book, Everything is Holy, my friend Tom Levinson reports on his one-man tour across the country to see how Americans live their faith. He finds, among many other fascinating communities, a Muslim deli in Dayton, Ohio, a Wiccan community in Texas's Fort Hood Army Base, and a coffee messiah running a popular nightclub in Seattle. And he finds what we also see. There's a dramatic centrifugal force in American religion today, which those communities which have traditionally been seen as mainstream are losing adherence to communities such as the non-denominational megachurches and the New Age movement, which function outside of traditional structures. So many of the long-standing denominations in the United States, the Presbyterians, Episcopalians, the United Church of Christ, the conservative movement in Judaism, are all smaller than they were when this century began. And religions which we have viewed as on the fringe are growing dramatically. Until very recently, those groups showed up in population surveys only aggregated together, sometimes aggravated, aggregated together as other, but no more. From 1990 to 2000, the Islamic population of the United States grew by 109%, the Buddhist population by 170%, Baha'is by 200%, and the Hindu population by 237%. And the more recent numbers are even more dramatic. One example, although the size of the American Muslim population is not without debate, the well-respected Pew Center puts the 2010 American Muslim population at about 2.6 million, up from 1.5 million in 2000. For those of you like me who struggle with math, that's a 69% increase in 10 years. And Pew projects a Muslim population of 6.2 million by the year 2020. That'd be a 140% cumulative increase over 20 years. From any perspective, ideological, practical, political, turning our backs on minority communities, including the Muslim community, simply doesn't make sense. And that's especially true, as I said, when we focus on the power we have when we work together. Think about the changes in the last half century alone that have been brought to this country, led often by the religious community. Think of the civil rights movement. Think of the anti-apartheid movement. Think of another example less well known, but in some ways even more far-reaching. And that is a Jubilee 2000 campaign to reduce international debt obligations. International debt is one of those really boring issues. Every time I try to get my hands around it, it slips away. It's confusing and touches far too much. And it's very easy for policymakers to ignore it. When the religious community came together in 2000, citing the scriptural commandment of a Jubilee year, when debts are forgiven, all of a sudden the issue had traction in Washington. What's happened since then? The number of people living under the international poverty line has declined from 1.8 billion to 1.4 billion. The proportion of people living in extreme poverty in developing countries has dropped from 46% to 27%. Enrollment in primary education continued to rise. We're going to meet our clean drinking water target. And debt burdens have been eased for developing countries and remain well below historical levels. It may not be flashy. It may not be front page. What is a clear illustration of the power that we have when our communities join together. Interreligious dialogue, interreligious work is about more than power. I believe it's about our own religious lives as well. I love the work that I'm blessed to do, because I believe that religious communities learning to interact and understand one another, not just to tolerate each other, not just to stay a safe distance from one another, is absolutely critical to building the kind of nation I'm confident we all aspire to be. The key lesson I drew then, which I commend to you now, is that photographs without much contrast are boring. They seem lifeless. It's only by adding contrast, making images sharper, more evocative, they become more meaningful. So too, I believe, to understanding our own faith. Second, I spend a lot of time every fall at soccer games, at my son's soccer games. He's a goalie, a very good goalie in case you're wondering. And that often means that he goes long periods of time without being involved in the run of play. The longer the better as far as I'm concerned. But it does give my mind some space to wander a bit. The soccer field at Daniel's school is surrounded by trees. And in the fall and soccer season, they are spectacular. And the diversity of their colors. It is simply beautiful to look at. But on my way home one day, away from the field, I passed a particularly lovely tree. Its leaves are rich, deep, beautiful orange. But I couldn't help notice how even the most beautiful tree, standing alone, was nowhere near as interesting as the vista of different trees growing all together. So too, I believe, with interreligious understandings, the religious landscape of America is as colorful as it is, because we see all those colors. And another thought. Trees are much safer in groves. An isolated tree is far more likely to, say, be blown away by a storm wind. In a forest, in a grove, the trees protect each other. So too, with interreligious understandings. Challenge is all too visible today in Tennessee, as you all know, where the legislature has before it a proposal to ban Sharia law. Tennessee is one of 13 states chasing after Oklahoma's unconstitutional coattails to bar any consideration of international or Islamic law. The Tennessee bill, and there are others here who are more expert in the details than I am, the Tennessee bill is one of the most radical, even of these bills. It claims that Sharia law continues to plague the United States generally, and Tennessee in particular. It worries that it requires Muslims to actively and passively support the replacement of America's constitutional republic with an Islamic state. And therefore it finds that adherence to the legal, political, military doctrine of Sharia law is treasonous and is a felony, punished by 15 years in jail. All of which raises to me an interesting question. What is Sharia law? Sharia law is a set of core principles that most Muslims recognize, as well as a set of rulings from their religious scholars. It covers many, I'd say almost every area of life. And there are different interpretations of the code, of course. It governs every aspect of Muslim life, from where and when and how to pray, to the giving of charity, to what food to eat. If you're wondering how that, in and of itself, could be a threat, how that could support the replacement of America's constitutional republic, well, I'm wondering too. Because I have to tell you that this proposal is, I believe, not just wrong-headed, but counterproductive. It disregards the important welcoming message that all of our faiths share, and even for those whose first and perhaps only concern is for security and for terrorism, it will inevitably be counterproductive. How could such a law help but discourage cooperation by American Muslims with counterterrorism efforts? In such an environment, Muslims would, of course, be more likely to pause before, say, passing on a lead to the police, at a time when we know from law enforcement that many of their most important and best leads, anti-terrorism cases, have come from within the Muslim community. There are great models of interreligious cooperation across the country.